Dan Abrams knows the law. He's become America's best-known legal analyst, runs the Top Live Legal TV network, and is chief legal correspondent for ABC News. This is the Dan Abrams Show on POTUS, where politics meets the law.
Hey, everyone, welcome to the show. Before I get to today's topic, I'll tell you, watching the Derek Chauvin trial, I think that the most powerful witnesses for the prosecution have been testifying. Of course, this is the case of the former police officer charged in the death of George Floyd. And the reason I think this is so devastating for the defense is that while eyewitness testimony about what happened is important and certainly powerful, and the video is the single most important piece of evidence for the prosecution, the fact that current police officers and the current police chief of Minneapolis and the use of force expert from the LAPD are all testifying against Derek Chauvin, saying that what he did crossed the line and was not reasonable, makes it very hard to see how you get an acquittal here. Now, you could argue cause of death, and that's certainly going to be the key argument for the defense. But I just don't see, I mean, it could be a hung jury. Could be manslaughter. I just don't see how there's a serious possibility of an acquittal at this point. And I have to say that, I think that many have, in the media coverage of it, have focused more on the eyewitness testimony because it's emotional and less on the police testimony, which I think is more significant as a legal matter. So I say that just because I'm covering it and watching it, but that's not today's topic. And I may hit more than one topic today. We'll see. I have no guest, just you guys and me. I want to talk about Matt Gaetz apparently having sought a blanket pardon, and why this is significant in terms of, in my view, undermining his credibility in terms of his defense as to what he has said. Now, remember, he is being investigated for possibly sex trafficking with regard to having sex possibly with a 17-year-old and having had her meet him, paid for, I guess, either flights or hotels or whatever. He denies it, says it didn't happen, says that he had consensual relationships with women of age. And he said something in his defense in the Washington Examiner a couple of days ago, which, again, I think that is very telling considering what this new news is about this effort at a blanket pardon. And there's a line where he says, I'm sure partisan crooks in Merrick Garland's Justice Department want to pervert the truth and the law to go after me. I will not be intimidated or extorted. The Biden Justice Department would rather investigate me for adult consensual sex than Hunter Biden for his shady business dealings, than others for illegal leaks, or a former Justice Department official for the evident extortion of a congressman. Go figure. But we now know there are two things wrong with that statement, right? Number one, Hunter Biden is being investigated. I did a whole show on it. Hunter Biden is being investigated. That's just not true. And number two, this investigation didn't start with the Biden Justice Department. This investigation didn't start with Merrick Garland's Justice Department. We now know, according to this New York Times report, that while he was under investigation, In the final weeks of Mr. Trump's term, Mr. Gaetz sought something in return. He privately asked the White House for blanket preemptive pardons for himself and unidentified congressional allies for any crimes that may have been committed, according to two people told of the discussions. Around that time, Mr. Gaetz was also publicly calling for broad pardons for Mr. Trump to thwart what he termed the bloodlust of their political opponents. But Justice Department investigators, remember, Trump Justice Department investigators, had begun questioning Gaetz' associates about his conduct, including whether he had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old that violated sex trafficking laws. It's unclear whether Gaetz or the White House knew at the time about the inquiry or who else he sought pardons for. Mr. Gaetz did not tell White House aides that he was under investigation for potential sex trafficking violations when he made the request. But top White House lawyers, Trump White House lawyers, and officials viewed the request for a preemptive pardon as a non-starter that would set a bad precedent, people said. Aides told Trump of the request, although Mr. Trump said in a statement on today that he had not discussed the matter directly with Gaetz. A spokesman for Trump declined to comment, but he did say in a public statement, Congressman Matt Gaetz has never asked me for a pardon. That doesn't answer the question. It must also be remembered that he has totally denied the accusations against him. He has. And I have said, and I'll say it again, I feel like some of the piling on Matt Gaetz is not useful in the context of the investigation. Meaning, it sure would make him gross if it's true, if he's showing pictures of women he had sex with to other members of Congress and others. That's morally repugnant, but it's not criminal. And doesn't, to me, tell me anything about whether he had sex with a 17-year-old. And here's what the response is. Entry-level political operatives have conflated a pardon call from Representative Gaetz, where he called for President Trump to pardon everyone from himself to his administration to Joe Exotic, with these false and increasingly bizarre partisan allegations against him. Again, investigation started under Trump. And the article goes on to talk more broadly about the relationship between Gaetz and the former president, about what an ally Gaetz had been to the former president. And I will say, and I've said this before, the New York Times' initial report on this suggesting that, he could be charged for trafficking an adult woman because of force or coercion, because there have been other cases where people who've been fed drugs have been charged under that, is incredibly speculative, right? At least we know, according to these numerous reports, that there isn't an investigation into whether he had sex with a 17-year-old girl. That's very different from saying, well, you know what else? He could maybe be charged with this too. Whoa. Let's focus on what we know. Now, Gaetz has also claimed that his family was targeted in an extortion effort. Sure, we're going to be learning more about that. Federal investigators have been asking witnesses about Mr. Gaetz' ties to a 17-year-old girl whom investigators believed had sex with Mr. Gaetz and was paid. People close to the investigation have said the interview grew out of a case the Justice Department began making last summer against a local Florida tax collector. This is this guy, Joel Greenberg, who's been indicted on a range of charges. 2 weeks after Mr. Trump lost re-election, Gaetz called on him to pardon everyone before he left, or they would be targeted by the radical left. Now, shortly after Mr. Trump left office, Mr. Gaetz publicly floated the idea of quitting Congress to defend Mr. Trump in impeachment. Mr. Trump's advisors showed no interest. Since the existence of the investigation was publicly revealed last week, Mr. Trump and his close allies have mostly remained silent, etc., etc. So I guess what makes me suspicious, right, is it starts to feel like Nat Gaetz is trying to distract us. And I say distract us by saying it's the Biden Justice Department. They didn't start this. They didn't launch this investigation. They were handed it. And that, that makes me concerned about Gaetz's, rather than saying, as Hunter Biden did, because he's being investigated too, I'm cooperating and I look forward to being exonerated. Gaetz is trying to, blame the people investigating. And, he keeps sort of trying to lump this in with all the other things, all the other horrible, false things that were said about Donald Trump. I mean, it's funny. It's like in the far right these days, all you have to do is show that you're willing to fight, right? He says, the battle for America's future demands gladiators. And I'm going to keep getting back up and fighting every single day. It's this owning the libs thing, right? I mean, the far right has, there's no even policy anymore. It's just all about owning the libs, being a gladiator, fighting. I'm going to fight like hell for my constituents in the country I deeply love. You deserve no less, he says. This sort of like fake tough guy stuff. It's like, stop. So that's where we are in the Matt Gaetz investigation, but it's certainly not good for him, right? That there's also this suggestion that he was asking for pardons. And this notion that, he was asking for pardons for everyone. It's like, well, what does that mean? Because he knew the radical left was going to... It's like, stop, man. No one believes that crap. Wayne is in California. Wayne, are you not happy with this topic?
Hi, Dan.
Wayne.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, hey, let me first tell you that I love your show. I look forward to listening to you every day. I love the other things you're involved in with as well, okay? So hopefully this is less criticism and more friendly observation.
No problem. I'm open to all sorts of criticism.
Okay. You make a great effort each day to tell us what a moderate you are, and I appreciate that. But who's really going to call in today on this show, Dan? Right-wingers and left-wingers. We don't care about Matt Gaetz anymore. We care about America. This using extreme politicians for us to all hate each other is getting old. I can get it from Rachel Maddow. I can get it from Brian Stelter. I just wish you, as excellent as your show is, would pick topics that reach the moderate group of people that you claim to be.
So this is a show where politics meets the law, right?
Right.
It seems to me it is hard to find a topic where politics meets the intersection occurs more directly than in something like the Matt Gaetz story, right? I think you'll have to agree on that. right?
It depends on what media you listen to. It's one of the
this show.
extremist stories. Yes, you're right.
Wait. This show which covers the intersection of politics and the law, right?
Okay.
It sure seems to me like the Matt Gaetz story is about the intersection of politics and the law.
Is speculation about politics and law? Because that's what it is.
An investigation is not speculation.
Half of what we talk about when you talk about Matt Gaetz is unfounded. We don't know what's true until we find out. It's all speculation.
But again, it's not speculation. It's an investigation. If I was speculating on whether there's an investigation, that would be different. There is clearly an investigation. Matt Gaetz isn't denying that there's an investigation. That's not speculation.
Most of your moderate callers today are either going to call in the right-wingers who protect Matt Gaetz no matter what he does, or they're going to be left-wingers who convict him.
See, that's not what happened.
He's guilty.
Look, I'll tell you this. When I covered the Hunter Biden story, I don't know, was it Monday? And I went through his investigation, et cetera. You could argue the same thing, right? Hunter Biden, who cares, et cetera. And I went through and I said, here's where I think what Hunter Biden is saying makes sense, and here's where I don't believe him, or here's where I'm concerned. That's analysis. You can call it speculation. I'd call it an analysis of the Hunter Biden story. I think I'm doing the same thing here with regard to the Matt Gaetz story. I don't think you're going to have people just on the extremes calling in. I think that the people who listen to this show appreciate the fact that I am saying, here's what we know, and here's where the New York Times and others are just speculating wildly. I think that that's what people come to this show to talk about. And I think you're gonna see, I think you're gonna see. Let's see what the other calls. If you end up being right about all the calls being extreme on one side or the other, Wayne, I'll give you a shout out at the end of the show. All right. So thank you.
Listen, Dan, it's your show. You choose the topic. I still enjoy it. Thank you for listening.
Look, and I appreciate your call. Hey, I hope nothing I've said has suggested that I'm not taking it to heart. I hear you. I just don't agree with you. But that's the beauty of having these conversations, right? Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate it. Let's go to John in Chicago. John, how you doing? Are you going to be an extremist in this one way or the other?
I am absolutely not. I was going to ask the question.
Wait a sec. Wait a sec. You're killing Wayne's narrative. Wait, this was all going to be extremists. Sorry. Go ahead, John.
I'm not piling on Wayne. I think Wayne's probably a good guy and well,
he is.
But because I'm a centrist. But I do have a question about the likelihood that Greenberg will roll on Gaetz if there's anything to roll on him about, because usually it seems to me Gaetz is clearly not the big fish here, right?
Right.
Whether he did something, he might have engaged in statutory rape. It could be nothing. It's all speculation, but it seems likely from what's been pieced together that he's not some criminal mastermind. He may have done some things, but he seems like a small fish. And Greenberg, if Greenberg's dead to rights and they say, we'll take half a year off or a year off your sentence, that may be enough. But it seems like they're not going to probably go that far to get him to roll on Gaetz.
That's a good question.
I want your perspective. That's just my sort of high level.
That's a very good, nuanced, non-extremist question on what happens next. And I agree with you. I do not think that they would make a deal with Greenberg to get Gaetz, right? Because you're exactly right. That the way you do these things is maybe you get Gaetz to roll on Greenberg. Maybe you say to Gaetz, look, we will immunize you here. You're not the big fish here. We want you to testify against Greenberg. That is much more likely than vice versa. And so I think your analysis is spot on in terms of the way that these investigations transpire. You look to use the smaller fish to get the bigger fish, and not vice versa. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Let's go to George in Florida. George, how you doing? What's going on?
Hey, Dan, not an extremist myself. Actually, I think I'm rather... I'm rather pragmatic about this whole thing. I'd like to take a look at Matt Gaetz as a Floridian. I have never cared for his behavior. I found him to be a tool. You know, if you act like a tool and you talk like a tool, you're probably found in aisle 14 of the tool store, the hardware store. I've watched the guy in action on HBO's The Circus. He goes out on the House floor, he delivers an impassioned speech, and then races back to the office to make sure his aides edited the soundbite to put it out on Twitter. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying that every politician is not superficial, but this guy took it to an extreme.
But let me ask you, so are you, let me ask you this, though, George. Are you, you're a Florida guy. Is he your congressman or no?
No, he's not mine. I'm in Central Florida.
Okay. What I don't think should happen, right, and one of the reasons I do topics like this is what I don't think should happen is that people should say, I don't like Gaetz. I've always thought he was a shady dude. Therefore, I'll bet he's guilty. And I'm not saying you're saying that, but that's what I fear in stories like this, right? It's the same thing people doing with Hunter Biden, right? Which is, it's got to be true. It's like, well, what's got to be true? That he engaged in some tax fraud in connection with his China investment? Let's see. Let's see what happens. Let's see what they turn up. Again, this is another investigation that started under the Trump Justice Department. And here's the good news about the Justice Department, right? Is that as much as, in particular, many on the right, it used to be people on the left, by the way, typically attacking the Justice Department. Now it's people on the right typically attacking the Justice Department. They are, generally political moderates who are law enforcement types who want the right thing to be done. And I guess that's the swamp to some people. It's a swamp that there are people who care about doing the right thing, who care about the law being upheld. And that applies to both Hunter Biden and Matt Gaetz. And both of them are being investigated, and neither have been charged. And the reason, that this is a story today is because of this additional reporting on the request for a blanket pardon, which, again, irritated me more about his language claiming that this is somehow about the Biden Justice Department, about the corrupt cronies working for Merrick Garland. It's like, man, enough with the insults that are completely unwarranted against these people in the Justice Department. You want to present proof? Gaetz is making these sort of allegations about extortion, and the guy who used to work in the Justice Department, and effectively that he was in cahoots, I guess, with the current Justice Department, and they were trying to frame it. Look, if that's true, it's all going to come out. He says that there are tapes that are going to prove. I promise you, if there are tapes that will prove that, I promise you they'll come out. I promise they'll come out. So anyway, George, thank you. Appreciate it. Let's go to Dan. Dan in South Carolina. Dan, what's going on?
Hey, Dan, thanks for taking my call. Now, you've droned on for how many days now about Matt Gaetz, and I appreciate it. I hope they fry his ass if he's guilty. Now, I'm on the conservative side, but go back to September, October. How many shows did you do on Hunter Biden?
Until we knew that Hunter Biden was being investigated? I did. I think we
knew in September, and we knew in October that he was being investigated.
I may not, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I thought we learned that formally of the investigation in December. Am I wrong about that?
Absolutely, you're wrong.
Okay, let me look it up.
Wait. Formally, that's probably not incorrect.
Okay.
But everybody knew the story long before that.
But wait. But the story is different than the investigation, because you're asking me about how much, and I did cover the Hunter Biden story. I don't remember how many days I did it, but I definitely talked about his laptop. I don't know. Sam Goldberg, can you weigh in? I don't know. How many times did we do the laptop story leading up to the election? Twice?
At least 4.
Okay. So we there's just no doubt that we did that. And so, again, this effort to sort of like suggest, and Dan, you're obviously a regular listener and generally a straight shooter, but this sort of suggestion that, you just want to get Matt Gaetz because he's conservative and not get Hunter Biden. It's just not true. The reason I did Hunter Biden was because Hunter Biden made news. And the reason I'm doing Matt Gaetz today is because of this new report on the blanket pardon undermining his claim about the Justice Department, the Biden Justice Department, and the cronies for Merrick Garland. So that's why I'm doing the story today. And this sort of notion that, you want, it just isn't true. With regard to me, you get a final word.
I'm not saying that's Justice Department and all that. I'm not saying any of that. All I'm saying is there's a different level of interest in every show about Matt Gaetz versus what went on Hunter. You can't begin to tell me that what went on with Hunter Biden wasn't a sick black mark on the media.
I don't agree with that.
An absolute black mark on the media.
I don't agree.
It was known. It was well known by
that what?
Everyone.
That he's being investigated for his tax. I mean, so you could make an argument, Dan, why aren't you covering Trump, the investigation into Trump's taxes more, right? Former president of the United States. Huge story. Dan, why aren't you doing that every day? Come on, man. This is an active investigation, right? Dan, I'm not doing it every day.
We had a guy that was his colleague, a military veteran, a hero, go on national TV and tell you exactly what happened. And no one except Fox News would cover that guy.
You know why?
Tell me that's not the truth.
I'll tell you why.
That's not the truth.
I'll tell you why, Dan. Because he gave his evidence, supposedly, to the Wall Street Journal, who was ready to do the story. And the problem was, didn't add up. He didn't have what he said he had. And they said that. And they did a whole story about the fact that they were ready to do it. They'd been working on this big blowout story about this guy who was going to link Joe Biden to some level of corruption. The problem is they didn't have it. That's why the media didn't cover it, because the story wasn't verified remotely, and it actually pointed in the other direction. So when you say that it's a pock on the media or a stain, it's just the opposite. It's the media was careful here. And look, and the area, again, the reason I came back to December is I got to break in a sec. The reason we're coming back to December is because that's when we learned that there's an investigation of Hunter Biden about his taxes. And that's a real story. And I covered it then, and I've covered it again. And I know I didn't give you the final word. I said I would, but I got to take a break. Dan, thank you. Appreciate it. Coming right back with more of your calls.
Welcome back to the Dan Abrams Show on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124. And whenever you want on the Sirius XM app, just search Dan Abrams.
We're back talking about the news that Matt Gaetz had requested a blanket pardon of the White House before Donald Trump left office. And, of course, we now know he's was being investigated for possible sex trafficking of a 17-year-old. He denies it. Let's go to Greg in Missouri. Greg, how you doing? What's going on?
Hey, Dan. I'm doing all right. How about yourself, man?
Good, thanks. What's up?
Yeah, I could tell by the calls you've had today. Hey, so I like to consider myself pretty middle of the road, despite where I live. I mean, I'm out here in Missouri on the backside of Fort Leonard Wood, and if there ever was Trump country, I'm in it. So in regards to this Gaetz investigation, I just wanted to say, I listen to Smirkanish, I listen to Cuomo, and I listen to you. You guys are my afternoon ritual out here. Well, morning ritual for me.
Thanks.
And I especially enjoy listening to you for your legal analysis of things. And I have actually appreciated having that insight on this Gaetz situation. So I felt like I just needed to call you and say, despite how a few of your other callers have felt. Some of us out here appreciate the legal breakdown. Because my grandmother was a federal attorney herself, and she was kind of my go-to liaison when things like this happened in the political world. She was someone I could always call and relate things on a legality level with and take the politics out of it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I take it as a great compliment. I'll tell you, one of the ways that I decide on the topics for this show are what are people asking me about, right? People aren't going to ask me, hey, Dan, what's the science behind the latest science from the CDC on COVID, right? Yeah, they're not going to ask Dan Abrams that. I'm going to be asking someone else that. That's why I did a show the other day. It was a related topic on the power of the teachers' unions, where I was saying that many of you will have more insights than do I. But what I try to do is pick topics where I feel like people are saying to me, hey, Dan, what do you make of the – and I'm getting asked, hey, Dan, what do you make of the Matt Gaetz situation? And by the way, this reminds me that this morning on GMA, and this isn't related, but I'll just say it because I think it's interesting, is I was talking about these COVID vaccines, passports, and whether private businesses can mandate you to have a vaccine passport and whether states can ban that. And it's a really interesting question, but it's actually a pretty easy one as a legal matter. And the answer is that private businesses can absolutely require a COVID vaccine passport. People can have religious exceptions. They can have a medical exception. But that doesn't mean that you can get into a concert venue if the concert venue requires it. It might mean that the venue decides to try to have accommodations for people, have a live stream or something, if you want to buy a ticket. But they can definitely do that. And the same way the governors can say, we're not going to allow any state agencies or businesses that are doing business with the state to require that. They're probably allowed to do that too. This just made me think about that, the way I picked the topics. I could have done that topic today, right? And that, I don't know, maybe I'll do it tomorrow. Depending on how many people I know, right? They come up to me and they say, hey, Dan, what do you make of? And, I do get asked about the vaccine passport question. And by the way, interesting note, and if I do this topic tomorrow, please don't yell at me for being redundant. There is no HIPAA issue with that. People say, oh, well, isn't it a HIPAA? No, HIPAA prevents a third party from disclosing. So you go with a passport, right? You say, here's my proof that I got vaccinated. You are self-disclosing. That's not a HIPAA violation. Now, if said concert venue or cruise line or airline then discloses your information, that is a HIPAA violation. Anyway, Greg, you got me going on a wild tangent here. Thank you. Let's stay in Florida and go to DJ. DJ, what's going on?
Okay, Jan, I'm going to go ahead and lay it out here that we all know who the big guy, you were talking about little fish, big fish. We all know who the big fish is. And the next step will probably be DeSantis. And then after that, we know they're heading down to old Mar-a-Lago because they live. This is our.
Right. This is this guy, DJ, I think, and he must maybe give different names at different times, who sort of tries to do a sort of a Trump impersonation, and then, kind of makes sort of nonsensical commentary. But, look, it's part of the show. DJ, thank you. Or shall I say, Mr. Big Guy, hey, big guy, thank you. Brian is in California. Brian, what's going on?
Dan, how are you?
I'm good. What's up?
Hey, so I've been listening to you for a little bit now. I'm a Smerconish devotee, and he mentions you from time to time, and as he should. Yesterday, it sure is. Yesterday, you made a comment about being in the middle, and his whole thing is, his theme song for his show. Clowns to the left, jokers to the right, and it made me stop and think. He gets, depending on what he says, either on CNN or on his radio program on POTUS, people attack him from the left and the right. And, you were kind of hinting at that happens to you yesterday. And just listening to some of the callers, it's still morning out here. I just wanted to call in and say, and you know this in your heart, but I think you're doing it all exactly as you should be. You're on point, and it's always salient. And you don't try to, do too many things. You just take one item and address it appropriately, and it's very admirable. And I'm a big fan, so I just wanted to give you that feedback.
Well, that's really nice of you. Thank you very much. It's I really do try to provide the context, right? So that it's not just a superficial, like even with Matt Gaetz, right? It's like, I don't know if he's guilty or not. And I'm just sort of laying out what I think is relevant and what's not, because again, this is something that I get asked about a lot. Brian, thank you. Let me do this. Take one more break here. Just you guys and me taking your phone calls on Matt Gaetz. And you know what? Since I brought it up, if you want to talk about the COVID passports, the vaccine passports, go at it. 866-967-6887. Coming back with more of your calls in a moment.
The Dan Abrams Show. Call now, 866-967-6887. You're listening to POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Now we're talking about a lot of different things. Matt Gaetz, COVID, vaccine passports, a little Hunter Biden. Let's go to Brian in Austin. Brian, how you doing? What's going on?
Awesome. Wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for calling.
Yeah, long-time listener, first time to get through. So I just had 3 points that I would love for you and or people that you know to look into. Okay. The whole Hunter Biden laptop.
Yeah.
First of all, if the initial reports were correct, there were actually 3 laptops and an external hard drive.
Well, that's what the guy said. The guy,
again, assuming the initial report was true.
No, but I'm not.
That's what he claimed.
Right, I'm not saying the report. I'm saying we're all in agreement that that's what the guy who worked at the laptop shop claims. He claims that there were 3 laptops
and a hard drive.
Correct.
And an external hard drive. Then, so right when this happened, I dug up his website. He's an Apple authorized reseller. Mm-hmm. So as such, if he follows their procedures, he has the serial numbers of all those laptops and a signature on the work order for whoever brought them in. And so if what the guy said was true, there should be a fair amount of evidence for the FBI to trace down, or whoever who wanted to. And I'm just wondering if anything ever came of that, because everybody keeps talking about the laptop. It's kind of like with Hillary Clinton's the server. But if you actually dug into the reports, there was actually 96 servers, 14 on-prem and the rest in the cloud, and so on. So there's always this massive oversimplification, which, of course, if you're just trying to pursue your point, it's totally valid because it's easier to simplify than to complicate, right? But in any event, I would love someone to chase that down if they could, and it may be impossible to chase down.
And what you want people to chase down is how many laptops, whether he's telling the truth about there having been 3 laptops and whether they can connect them back to Hunter Biden based on the, let's call it the computer fingerprint that is embedded in any computer, in any Apple.
And who signed the work order.
Right. Okay.
I would love to see a photocopy of that work order.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Let's go to Steve in Michigan. Steve, how you doing? What's going on?
Hi. About the Matt Gaetz saga, I guess you'd call it. The part of it's so convoluted, but the one part that just makes it most bizarre for me is to think that one of the aspects of it was that Matt Gaetz would become a hero when this Levinson man was returned, and then Joe Biden would, if he was guilty, Joe Biden would pardon him for possibly statutory rape. That is unbelievable. I mean, who would think that? So
the bottom line is, according to Matt Gaetz, if he were here, he'd say, the guy was a terrible extortionist, right? I mean, but I agree with you. It's totally absurd, right? But the claim is that they were pretending, or that they actually were in with Biden, right? And that, maybe they'd even talk to Biden about this, which of course is nonsense. So I hear you. Thank you, Steve. Let's go to Bob in Philly. Bob, how you doing? What's going on?
Hey, Dan, how you doing?
Good.
I just don't understand these people's obsession with Hunter Biden. Now they're comparing Hunter Biden, the private citizen, to Matt Gaetz, a sitting congressman. I mean, it just seemed, and then it's the media's fault that the media didn't go after Hunter Biden with this non-story. I've watched that Bobulinski interview 3 or 4 times, and the big gotcha moment is that Joe Biden, also a private citizen at the time, knew about his son meeting with Chinese people. They always fail to tell me what the criminality is there. And there's some kind of problem with that. They want the media to chase it down.
Well, what they want to do is suggest that Joe Biden lied when he said he had no conversations and certainly no relationship with any of Hunter's business ventures. That's the way they're trying to get Joe Biden on this.
But that's not criminal. He's a private citizen. So is his son. And
I understand, but the reason there is a comparison, right, is because Hunter Biden, son of the President of the United States, is now being investigated by the Department of Justice. And Matt Gaetz, the United States Congressman, is now being investigated by the Department of Justice. They are 2 very, very different kinds of crimes. But, look, and you heard me taking on the person who's saying, the media should have covered the Hunter Biden story more. It's like, no. A, because the source was so shady, and B, because there wasn't a there. The there is the criminal investigation into Hunter Biden. That is the there. So anyway, Bob, thank you. Let's go to Patrick in Florida. Patrick, how you doing? What's going on?
Hey, Dan, right now I have a brother, a sister-in-law, a niece, and a granddaughter that all have COVID right now. People think it's still going on. It's not. Now they're all going to recover, but it is still here. And what I wanted to call about was the COVID passport. That's what opens everything up. I want to go to a ball game. I don't want to sit next to somebody who's got it, who is unvaccinated. For businesses to say, hey, we require a picture on your phone of your COVID card is so smart. It gets everybody to that business. This is, the religious people don't go to a ball game. You don't have to. This is America. We require you to show an ID to get on an airplane, for crying out loud.
It's not just showing an ID to get an airline, because then you get into the whole, they would say that about voter ID too, that's the argument. And I don't want to sort of shift gears here. But the bottom line is the state, by the Supreme Court, there was a challenge to a state requiring people to get smallpox vaccines. And the Supreme Court said, of course the state can mandate that as part of its health and safety protocols. And so if the state can do it, certainly private entities can do it. And, I'm with you. I mean, I think that this sort of like this, it's funny because the people who used to be, there are these people who are suddenly finding their civil libertarian roots who didn't really have it before, based on this sort of mass distrust. And look, you don't want to get a COVID vaccine. Look, I have to say that I do have obviously sympathy for people where there's a medical issue. I have sympathy where there's a true religious objection, but yeah, it means that you may not be able to do the same things that everyone else can do. So, I hear you. Let's go to Mark in Seattle. Mark, how you doing?
My call. Hey, I wanted to talk about this Matt Gaetz thing just for a half second. And it seemed to me that much like this guy, Martin Shkreli, it's like he's the farmer bro guy from way back.
Yep.
And it's like he just like doing all these things that are like incredibly obnoxious, and just like the whole public was like against him. And that to me made it so that like, oh my God, well now all this scrutiny is going to come down on you. Just like Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz, I mean, I didn't watch him that much because every time he said stuff, it was just like abhorrent to me. He would always say these just like really left-wing guy. But I think that once you start doing that kind of stuff, you get real out in front, and who knows, these Boberts and Taylor Greens, they have to watch out because people are going to be just watching for any possible misstep, and then just boom, come down hard.
Well, that's true, but I would separate that out into two buckets, right? The first one is I don't believe that the Justice Department started investigating this because they wanted, he's out there saying they found him through this other guy, Joel Greenberg. They weren't investigating Matt Gaetz. They were investigating this guy Greenberg. And in the context of the investigation with Greenberg, Gaetz' name kept coming up. So that's why Matt Gaetz is being investigated here. That's a separate question from sort of, broadly the piling on that's occurring. That I do think is the sort of like, ha, 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 we got him.